About me. Unfiltered and honest, my name is Kimberly Kim Morgan. And as I sit down to tell this story, my story, I am 37 years old, living in a quiet suburb just outside of Denver, Colorado. If there's one thing I've learned in my 30-something years on this earth, it's that you never truly know what you're made of until life throws you into the fire. And believe me, I've been scorched, rebuilt, and learned a few things about resilience, heartbreak, and the messy reality of forgiveness, or the lack thereof. I grew up in the heart of Montana, the eldest daughter in a family with 4 rambunctious siblings. I was the responsible one, the sibling who remembered birthdays, wrote thank you notes after Christmas, and stayed up until everyone was asleep at slumber parties, quietly cleaning up the soda spills. My parents ran a small hardware store, instilling in us a love for honest work and loyalty, sometimes to a fault. We weren't rich, but my family was a strong anchor, sometimes almost suffocating in their small-town expectations. After high school, I got a full scholarship to the University of Colorado. It was there that I tasted freedom for the first time. Sprawling lawns, friends from every state and continent, staying out late with study partners, who eventually became my family away from home. A part-time job at a coffee shop meant I could pay for my own apartment, which felt like the biggest accomplishment in the world. It was during this wild, beautiful phase of my life that I met Tyler, the man who would later become my husband. He was kind, funny, gentle, a total contrast to the hard-edged boys I'd dated before. The truth? I'd always been the type to work hard for the things I wanted: grades, opportunities, relationships, and for the acceptance of the people around me. I thought I understood loyalty. I thought friendship was sacred. I thought, God help me, that if I poured enough love and understanding into my relationships, they would last. Turns out, life isn't a recipe you follow for guaranteed results. Over the years, I built a quiet, steady life with Tyler. We bought our first home together, a simple split level with an overly enthusiastic garden, and adopted a golden retriever named Gus, who slobbered on every single piece of furniture we owned. I worked as a middle school English teacher, filling my days with stories and the relentless energy of hormonal preteens. Most evenings, after grading papers, I curled up with Tyler on the couch, convinced that I'd finally gotten it right, that I was safe. Friendship, too, has always been my lifeline. My best friend was Julia Torres. Julia and I met during my second year of college and quickly became inseparable. Julia was the kind of woman who could light up an entire room with her laugh. She stood by my side during the big moments: weddings, funerals, job promotions, and the small ones, like midnight grocery store runs and ice cream after bad news. I loved her like a sister and counted on her loyalty as much as my own breath. But here's the thing about life. Sometimes, even the people you trust the most are capable of surprise, and not always the good kind. This is where my story really begins, with the unraveling of the life I thought I built, and me, Kimberly Morgan, trying to piece together who I am when everything I trusted suddenly slipped away. Fleeting happiness and the best friend. It's funny how memory turns sunshine days into golden film. Those first years with Ethan genuinely felt like a movie montage. Lazy Sundays, laughing in bed, late-night drives, listening to our favorite songs, kitchen dances that made Daisy bark with glee. We weren't perfect, but we were real, and real felt like more than enough. But this chapter isn't just about Ethan. It's about Nicole, too. My best friend since my first day at Boston University. If soulmates exist outside of romance, Nicole was mine. We were a classic odd couple. Me, cautious and sarcastic. Nicole, fearless and effervescent. She had a wild mane of curly red hair, a magnetic laugh, and enough stories for 10 lifetimes. When I moved to Denver, so did she. Just one neighborhood over. It was Nicole who cheered the loudest when Ethan and I got together. Nicole who brought wine and empathy after every disaster. Nicole who stood at my side when Ethan and I exchanged vows in a faded mountain chapel. Our little life was good enough to almost make me superstitious. Nicole was basically part of our family. She became Aunt Nikki to Daisy, our +1 to spontaneous road trips, the friend who'd help us paint the living room and then spill paint on her jeans on purpose. Looking back, I realize I was blissfully blind to cracks in the glass. There were times Ethan and I fought, and instead of turning to my husband, I'd vent to Nicole. When Nicole had a crisis, I was her rock. We believed in no secrets, no walls. After I married Ethan, that happiness seemed to double, at least on the surface. He was attentive, spontaneous in the best ways, grateful for even the smallest kind gestures. Nicole was woven into almost all our big moments. My first book deal celebration, road trips, holidays, quiet nights where laughter rang louder than the TV. Maybe it should have bothered me that sometimes Ethan and Nicole's inside jokes left me on the sidelines, or that Nicole offered to help Ethan with things I could have easily handled. But Nicole was my person, and trusting her felt automatic, like breathing. Besides, Joy loves to dress in routine. We built our own traditions. Friday pizza with Nicole and her latest dating disaster stories. Summer hikes to the reservoir. Birthday parties where all our friends became family. It all felt so safe. I guess the cruelest part of betrayal is how long it lets you believe you're protected. That's how fleeting happiness works. You don't notice the shadows creeping in until you're already standing in the dark. The first gut feeling and subtle clues. Looking back, I think the first shadow fell in autumn. It was the sort of Texas fall that's more myth than reality. Short sleeves and iced tea under an oak tree, with a gentle breeze, pretending to be cool. I'd spent the afternoon sorting through some old family photos for Emily's school project. David worked late more often those days, citing tight deadlines as his tech company rolled out a new product. I missed him, but I tried not to fuss. He loved his work, and I prided myself on being the supportive wife who never nagged. One Tuesday, I stopped by David's office on a whim. Emily's school had let out early, and she'd begged, "Let's surprise Daddy." I made coffee, grabbed 2 cupcakes from the bakery, and set out, humming along to the car radio. David wasn't at his desk. His secretary, Cynthia, said he'd run out for coffee himself. Odd, given the cup I'd just brought. But I brushed it off. Emily and I left a note in the cupcakes, and I tried to ignore the faint unease in my chest on the drive home. Then there were the text messages. Small, innocuous things that began to form a pattern. David, usually easygoing, grew guarded about his phone. He changed his passcode, a first in 15 years together. At night, I'd hear the gentle buzz of his phone under the pillow, and he'd respond quickly, never allowing me a glance at the screen. When I asked about it, he laughed it off. Just work. You know how demanding the new project is. Lauren began to show up at our house at odd times, more than usual. She'd drop by with pizza on Wednesday nights when David was working late, and linger even after David texted to say he'd stay at the office. She'd offer to help around the house, keeping Emily entertained so I could rest. Her tone extra sweet, as if she tried to make up for something. The next clue was scent, perfume, specific and memorable. One evening, I hugged David after he returned home. The cologne I bought him faintly overpowered by a floral note that didn't belong to me. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, so I convinced myself it was from a handshake or a brush in a crowded elevator. Then there was the bracelet. It was a thin, delicate silver band with an inscription I knew well. Years ago, I'd given one just like it to Lauren as a thank you for being my anchor during my battle with postpartum depression. One night, glancing into our car after David arrived home, I saw the bracelet glinting on the front seat. It was too small for David, too feminine, and Lauren's engraved L.A. was unmistakable. When I asked about it, David stammered, before insisting Lauren had just forgotten it after helping with groceries. Doubt is a sly creature. It creeps in as a whisper, then grows claws. I tried to ignore it, to blame exhaustion or paranoia, but the signs multiplied. At a dinner party, I caught snippets of inside jokes between David and Lauren. Laughter that left me standing on the outside of my own marriage. They'd hesitate before including me in stories. I became hyper-aware of glances, awkward pauses, fleeting touches that lingered a moment too long. A turning point came when I borrowed David's car for my weekly grocery run. I rarely drove his car. He kept it spotless, always worried Emily would get crumbs everywhere. So I felt a little mischievous. After loading the groceries into the trunk, I noticed a Starbucks receipt wedged beside the driver's seat for 2 pumpkin spice lattes. The date matched a Wednesday, a night I remembered distinctly. Lauren stayed over because of a supposed late shift, and David didn't come home until 2 a.m. The odds were too improbable, too pointed for coincidence. I tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself David and Lauren were friends, nothing more, that my mind was conjuring problems in a happy situation. But I couldn't shake the dread growing in my chest. Emily, attuned to my moods, was unusually quiet, asking, "Mommy, are you okay?" My attempts at reassurance only rang hollow. One night, after the house was quiet, I started a new habit, journaling, but also carefully tracking the smallest things. Receipts, times, places, conversations. It felt absurd, like I was running an investigation in my own home. But when trust is shadowed by doubt, logic becomes your best weapon. And I was determined not to confront them empty-handed. I began noticing concealed conversations. Lauren and David would huddle near the patio, their voices dropping when I entered a room. One afternoon, standing at the kitchen window after a rough day at work, I watched them chat in the driveway. Lauren handed David something, a folded paper, a note. He smiled more deeply than he had with me in months. The air between them seemed thick with secrets. I started double-checking Lauren's excuses at work. When she said she had a late shift, I called the hospital. Just to confirm, I told myself, feigning forgetfulness. "No, Lauren isn't on call tonight," the charge nurse told me. The pattern repeated more times than I wanted to admit. Through all of this, I questioned myself. Was I becoming bitter or jealous, reading into coincidences that meant nothing? But in my gut, I knew. I have always trusted my instincts. And now, they were screaming. There are moments in everyone's life when the ground shifts beneath your feet, and suddenly, what you once called home feels unfamiliar. I moved through those days in a fog, watching my life bend around corners I couldn't quite see. It was the silent, creeping suspicion, the sickening sense of betrayal that lingers even before you have proof. That autumn, I wasn't just Rachel, school librarian and mother. I was the invisible observer in my own home, watching the cracks spread in a foundation I thought was unbreakable. Each clue scraped away at my belief in my marriage, my friendship, I wasn't sure where the line between paranoia and reality began or ended, but I knew, somehow, that the pain of truth would cut much deeper than uncertainty. Gathering evidence, I wish I could tell you that. Once I had my suspicions, I confronted Adam or Aaron with direct questions. That honesty triumphed, and we all dealt with the aftermath as reasonable adults. But life hardly plays out that way, especially when trust has started to rot at the roots. My instincts screamed for proof. My wounded pride demanded a kind of justice. And, God help me, I wanted an undeniable truth, not just hunches, before I toppled the world my daughter and I called home. So I started small. At first, I told myself it was just gathering information, just to put my own mind at ease. The problem is, once you begin to look closely at the cracks in your foundations, you find more than you bargained for. I started with Adam's phone. He'd grown careless, or perhaps arrogant, but one night he left it charging in the kitchen while he showered. My hands trembled as I entered the passcode, the old birthday he thought I'd forgotten. There, buried between messages about office meetings and fantasy football chat groups, was an entire thread under a generic male name. I clicked in. Photos, inside jokes, declarations of missing each other. Erin's face, not a man's. Her name hidden in his contacts, like a secret code. My whole body buzzed with adrenaline as I screenshotted everything and emailed it to myself. A digital insurance policy tucked away in a hidden folder. It wasn't enough. After all, people could say I read things wrong. Projecting my fears onto coincidence, I decided to check our family tablet next. Adam used it for work, but Lila played games on it. When I searched the device, I found more signs. Calendar events titled with song lyric references only Adam and Erin understood. Locations set for errands. On weekends, he'd claim to be at hardware stores, all at Erin's street address. Then I focused on bank statements. I requested all our credit card records online and combed through them. Restaurant bills for two at bistros. Adam never took me. Hotel reservations, only blocks from Erin's condo. I printed them out, highlighted times and dates, built a timeline. The anger hardened into a resolve. I'd no longer accept blurry suspicions. I was building a case as methodically as any private investigator. My next step was purely physical, collecting forgotten objects. A gold hairpin marked EL, Erin's initials, found under the passenger seat in Adam's car. A scarf she claimed to have lost and never looked for, both delivered back to her with an icy politeness, watching for a flicker of guilt she never broke. Another night, I set the voice recorder on my phone before Adam got home. I wanted to catch the conversations he had the minute he walked in, the lively phone calls he made outside on the porch. Hours of audio, sometimes benign, sometimes offering snippets of comfort, exchanged with someone I knew was not me. Miss you already. Or, more damning, Erin, don't worry, Jess won't suspect a thing. At work, Erin grew edgy. I watched her skip meetings, whisper in hallways, stare at her phone during staff lunches. I played detective, testing her stories, checking social media, calling her office when she claimed double shifts. Lila, perceptive even at 7, once said, "Why is Auntie Erin mad at you, Mommy?" How do you explain adult betrayal to a child? You don't. You just grit your teeth and build your dossier. After weeks collecting evidence, I organized it into an ironclad file. Copies of hotel keys, screen grabs of text messages, emails, and expense receipts. I even confronted Adam indirectly by asking about the bills, the time away. He lied so smoothly, practiced enough to be rehearsed, smiling at me with the face I thought I knew. The hardest piece of information came by accident, through the lens of my own insecurity. I visited a family friend who worked at a boutique hotel. She assumed I was staying with Adam and his friend last month. My silence couldn't mask the pain. It wasn't me, I whispered, heart hammering. I added her testimony to my growing list. By now, the truth was ironclad. There was no room left for denial or self-gaslighting. I rehearsed what a confrontation might look like. But my anger was no longer the kind that wanted an argument. I wanted clarity, exposure, the cleansing destruction that follows betrayal. But I wasn't going to yell or cry for their benefit. I would wait and play by my own rules. With the evidence organized, cold and sharp as glass, I planned my next move. I would wait for a moment neither Adam nor Aaron would ever forget. A gathering of friends and family, a perfectly orchestrated unveiling. My pain-deserved witness, the fateful reunion party. There's something oddly sacred about planning a party. It's an act wrapped in anticipation and hope. But for me, orchestrating our 10th wedding anniversary celebration took on a strange, feverish energy. Outwardly, I was just a devoted wife, arranging a milestone gathering. Inwardly, I was engineering a reckoning, one I desperately needed, not only to force the truth into the light, but also to reclaim the narrative of my own life. It started, as many of these things do, with a meticulously crafted invitation. I pored over every word, making sure it sounded heartfelt and joyful, nothing out of the ordinary. Join us for a night of celebration, laughter, and memories as we mark 10 years of marriage, I wrote, choosing fonts that seemed warm and festive. My husband, Mike, still oblivious, read the draft and gave me a casual thumbs up. I mailed and emailed invites to family, friends, and critically, to my best friend, Heather, the woman whose text messages with Mike had become the secret poison in my veins. On the surface, every detail was a labor of love. I chose the venue, a charming riverside restaurant just out of the city, because I knew how my mother-in-law adored their peach cobbler. I agonized over the dinner menu, booking a jazz trio for ambiance and ordering flowers in the deepest reds and golds. The florist asked if the anniversary couple had a favorite bloom, and I lied. We both love dahlias. To everyone else, this looked like my love letter to our shared history. But every arrangement, every RSVP I received, felt like a step closer to personal detonation. The weeks leading up to the event unfolded with a surreal sense of duality. I'd move through each day acting out the doting wife, helping my daughter with homework, chatting back and forth with Mike about wine pairings for the party. At night, I'd sit in the shadows of our living room, scrolling through screenshots, waiting for my breathing to slow down. People would gush, "You two are an inspiration," or 10 years is such an achievement. If only they knew. The harder it became to keep the secret, the more fiercely I protected it, if only to make the big reveal sting that much sharper. On the afternoon of the party, I went into full hostess mode. My dress was simple but elegant, a navy blue silk that Mike always said brought out my eyes. I was careful with my makeup, careful with every single detail, telling myself that tonight I needed to be composed. No visible cracks, no sign of the tempest inside. When we arrived, the venue glowed with lantern lights. Close friends hugged us. Relatives beamed and snapped photos with their phones. My daughter clung to my leg and spun in circles, giggling as Heather walked in, right on time, radiant in a way that, until then, had only filled me with pride. Now it hurt to look at her. Every laugh, every sidelong glance was loaded with an electric charge I couldn't quite diffuse. Mike played the part of the devoted husband with nauseating credence, telling funny stories, filling guests' glasses, giving speeches that made my relatives dab at their eyes. Heather, ever the charismatic guest, mingled easily. If they were nervous, they didn't show it. If they suspected, I saw no sign. Through toasts and dinner, every smile I gave was painstakingly painted on. There are moments in life where you have to act so thoroughly, even your own heart is fooled for a while. I drank in the details. How Heather's hand grazed Mike's once. How their eyes avoided meeting for just a second too long. How Heather's laughter faltered whenever I mentioned our plans for the future. My own performance was flawless. I received compliments. I kept the playlist going. I fielded questions about our wedding all those years ago. Yet underneath it all, I counted the minutes to dessert. The signal for my carefully orchestrated finale. And what a finale I had planned. After cake was served, 3 layers, all white buttercream and sugared flowers. I stood up, glass in hand. The jazz trio fell silent. The conversation ebbed and flowed around me, everyone expecting a sappy thank you speech. My hands shook, just a little, but enough for me to notice the adrenaline in my veins. Before we finished dessert, I began, my voice steady. I want to take a moment to show everyone something to mark this occasion. I gestured toward the mounted projector and pressed a remote hidden at my side. Photos flickered across the screen at first. Charming snapshots, our wedding, our daughter as a baby, silly vacation memories. The room cooed and laughed. Just as the nostalgia reached its peak, I shifted to the folder I'd named Surprises. The tone of the images changed. There were chat logs, innocuous at first, then not. Screenshots, nicknames and hearts, late-night plans, poorly disguised references, audio recordings I'd pulled from a synced device. A few sentences, casual at first, then unmistakably private. I watched, almost as a third party, as confusion crept over faces, as shock spread like a wave. My mother gasped. Heather froze, fork halfway to her mouth. Mike's expression hardened and then cracked. He half stood, then sat back down. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Not in this room. I finished with my own voice. Tonight is the close of one chapter, the start of another. Thank you all for being witnesses, not just to our marriage, but to its true end. And I put down the remote, letting the silence ring out. Some guests stormed out. Others wept, openly, or came to embrace me. Mike stammered apologies, his face pale and drawn. Heather just stood there, eyes brimming, words failing her at last. The air was thick with disbelief, hurt, and, underneath it all, a weird sense of release, like the tension had finally snapped. The truth spilled out into the open, and for just a moment, I felt lighter. I made my way to my daughter, knelt, and whispered that we would leave soon. Everything else was a blur. People whispering, someone shouting outside, questions I couldn't hear. The reunion had ended, not with more togetherness, but with singular, crystalline clarity. The unexpected gift for the betrayer. The aftermath of the party felt like the silent calm after a violent storm. Still uneasy, the air taut with everything unspoken. But if I'd learned anything through the months of suspicion and heartbreak, it was this. Moving quietly doesn't mean surrendering. Sometimes it's the lead-up to your most decisive act. And so, armed with months of evidence and a resolve that felt colder than anger, I planned my gift, a reckoning, both thoughtful and cruel in its precision. The days immediately following the reunion party passed in a fever dream. Mike shuffled around the house, hollow-eyed and brittle, while Heather disappeared, her car gone from her driveway, her phone ringing endlessly before plunging to voicemail. My daughter, bless her, seemed to sense the tectonic shift beneath her childhood, though I did my best to shield her from the worst of it. For the outside world, I put on a serene face. Office meetings, school drop-offs, casual greetings in the grocery store. The real me, however, had never been more awake. Perhaps people expect a woman betrayed to shrink, to curl inward with shame or loss. I refused. I moved through those days with purpose, letting grief carve me out only to refill me with determination. The unexpected gift I was crafting began as a list, tangible, unpretentious, ruthless in its logic. I wanted Mike and Heather to feel something of what I felt, the shock, the clarity, the absolute absence of safety. But unlike their affair, I would not stoop to manipulation in the shadows. No, mine would be laid bare, meticulously presented, public in one sense, private in another. My dignity would remain intact. My response would be as elegant as it was brutal. First, I gathered the evidence into a neat, embossed folder. Every message, every calendar entry, every blurry hotel receipt in screenshot. Sorted, annotated, numbered. On the cover, I used my own hands to write, in beautiful silver ink, "Foreclosure, for you." I placed it on the kitchen table, the same table at which our family had once played board games and celebrated birthdays. For an entire morning, I left it there. Mike saw it on his haphazard march through the kitchen, but did not dare touch it. His gaze slid over it like oil on water, and I waited, patient as an old librarian, overseeing rare manuscripts. But it wasn't just about Mike. Heather had been my friend, my soul's twin, my companion, through every stage of adult life. I wanted her to face the consequences as well, not through shouting or physical confrontation, but through a truth she could not escape. I mailed her a single envelope. Inside it, a letter written in my clearest hand. I included photos only she and I could recognize. The kind from younger, happier days. Souvenirs of loyalty now severed. "You know what this means," I wrote. "If you have any decency left, you'll know what comes next." I sealed it with her own favorite sticker, a sunflower she'd once gifted me on a summer road trip. It was a closing ceremony, as gentle as I could muster, yet heavy with finality. Friends and family began to buzz. After all, you don't implode a 10-year marriage at a public party without debris flying. There were phone calls, some to comfort, others to dig for gossip. My mother alternated between weeping and delivering icy verdicts. My sister drove 5 hours just to hold me for a single evening. I refused most invitations to rehash the pain, but with my closest confidants, I allowed myself the luxury of raw honesty. Each retelling was like lancing a wound. It hurt, but it kept the poison from going deeper. Even as the shock waves from the party rippled through our social circles, I made preparations with methodical care. I gathered joint financial documents, screenshot emails, and searched every corner of the house for anything I would miss when I left for good. I met with my lawyer, her handshake firm, her words practical, but laced with empathetic anger on my behalf. "You control the narrative now, not them," she told me. I clung to that sentence in the lonely hours after midnight, when my courage flagged and the echoing quiet of an empty marriage pressed in around my heart. There was a final step, something for myself. My therapist once recommended the power of rituals, ways to mark the turning points of grief. So, the night before I filed for divorce, I let myself feel everything. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror in an old dress Mike had always loved, and for a single dangerous moment, I allowed myself to weep with longing for what was, for what might have been. Then, I wiped my tears and poured myself a glass of celebratory wine, toasting the ghost of my former life. Letting go is rarely as cinematic as they show in movies. But that night, it came pretty damn close. The day I filed the paperwork was crisp, the October air bracing as a slap. I handed over the folder to my attorney, who promised to deliver it to Mike at the appropriate time. There was no grand confrontation, no screaming matches or dramatic farewells. Instead, I walked quietly into my daughter's school, picked her up early, and took her for pancakes. I told her that things were going to change, but that it would be okay, that I loved her with the full force of every cell in my body. She squeezed my hand so tightly my fingers tingled, but I felt stronger for it. Word of my gift, the folder, the letter, the dignified detachment spread. I began to hear secondhand stories of Mike's reaction. Shattered, bewildered, by turns pleading and enraged. Some said he appeared at Heather's door late at night, voice ragged. Others claimed he paced the local park, banging on his phone in desperate cycles of silence and shouting. I didn't care. Maybe they expected a mess, or hoped for a last dramatic attempt at reconciliation. They never got it. Calling it an unexpected gift made sense, I suppose. Neither Mike nor Heather had truly believed I would follow through, much less with such unflinching composure. Now, the surprise was not simply their public exposure, but the way I reclaimed my own narrative. I made sure the evidence was not distributed to our entire community, only to those who needed to know. My purpose wasn't humiliation for its own sake, but a kind of careful justice. I wanted the people who mattered most, especially my daughter, to know that I would defend our dignity without ever becoming what I despised. Afterward, I allowed myself a small, wicked satisfaction. Their secret was no longer a cancer. It had been excised cleanly. I found Heather's letter returned, unopened, weeks later. It bore no note, no apology. That absence told me everything. I tucked it away in the back of my sock drawer, next to faded birthday cards and photos of better times. I felt nostalgia, yes, but the ache was turning, slowly, into relief. In the weeks that followed, I tried to give my daughter what she needed: stability, reassurance, love that never wavered. We cooked simple meals together, painted her bedroom a vibrant, new color, and read on the porch wrapped in blankets as the first snows came. The world, impossibly, kept turning. My strength surprised even me. One evening, well after the dust had settled, Mike showed up at the house. He stood on the porch like a schoolboy, clutching the file folder and a bouquet of wilting supermarket flowers. His apology was stilted, more out of desperation than remorse. I heard him out because I needed to, but every word only confirmed what I already knew. Some betrayals are simply too foundational to forgive. I wished him well, honestly, but sent him away. As for Heather, there was never a tearful confrontation. Our friendship ended not with a bang, but with the quiet snip of severed ties. Over time, I discovered that some of the friends who'd cheered the loudest for us as a couple faded away, but others, those who saw my resilience, my dignity, drew closer than ever, knitting together a new, tighter family out of shared loyalty and trust. There were difficult days, of course. Waking up in an empty bed, answering hard questions from my daughter, wondering, late at night, if I could have done something differently, whether I myself had missed the signs or been too trusting. But that introspection was the real, unexpected gift, realizing that I would rather face loneliness with honesty than togetherness built on lies. I began to make new routines, small and sacred: a peaceful morning coffee alone on the deck, evening walks through the quiet neighborhood where autumn leaves crunched underfoot. Each day, I grew stronger, reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. With time, the hurt shifted from raw pain to something wiser. Empathy for those still lost in their own illusions. Respect for the version of myself who fought for truth. And finally, hope. Delicate at first, then irrepressible. I bought new plants for the living room. I called old friends I'd neglected. I swapped out the photos on our walls, not to erase the past, but to mark the beginning of something new. In the end, my unexpected gift was as much for me as it was for them. Because when you endure betrayal, you discover the contours of your strength. You learn not only what others are capable of, but what you yourself can survive. I rebuilt my life, not as an act of revenge, but as a testament to the quiet power of endurance, the stubborn refusal to let bitterness win. My story, I realized, didn't end with their betrayal. It began again, with me, stepping forward after the pain. There's a strange quiet after big storms, the kind where you stand amid overturned chairs and broken branches, surveying the mess and wondering if the world will ever look normal again. That was me after everything exploded. After the files, the party, the letters, the finality of it all. I remember waking up alone that first morning in my new apartment. My body curled in on itself, clutching a pillow that didn't smell like anyone anymore. For a moment, I was weightless. Then the grief rushed in like a tidal wave. I cried until my chest ached, until my voice was ragged and my face was sore. But that day was the beginning. Not the beginning I had wished for, or even dreamed of. I'd always pictured a gentle drifting apart, not an earthquake splitting the ground beneath me, but a beginning, all the same. After so much chaos and adrenaline, the world, in its small daily motions, felt strange and hollow. The ordinary, even brushing my teeth or making coffee, felt like a test. My daughter became my anchor during those first weeks. I tried to keep mornings as normal as possible. Pancakes on Saturdays, the same mismatched mugs for hot chocolate, story time with our favorite dog-eared books. Sometimes she would ask, "Is Daddy coming back?" Or, "Why doesn't Aunt Heather call anymore?" And I'd take a shaky breath and answer honestly, but gently, "Things are going to change, honey. But I will never stop loving you. I promise." I kept moving in small ways. I unpacked my boxes slowly, giving each object its own place, a sign that I'd chosen this new home on purpose. I bought myself bunches of flowers, not to impress anyone or fill a void, but simply to bring color into the rooms. At night, after I put my daughter to bed, I'd often sit by the window, listening to the hush of the city, wondering how long it would take for my broken heart to quiet down. Sometimes loneliness was suffocating. Other times, it felt like a canvas, empty and terrifying. Yes, but with enough space to begin again. Therapy became my lifeline. Each Wednesday evening, I'd sit across from Dr. Malhotra in the soft-lit room with the ticking clock and the faded rug. For the first few sessions, I mostly sobbed, but she let me unravel at my own pace, giving me tools for the unthinkable. How to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner. How to process betrayal without becoming cynical. How to recognize that worthiness isn't measured by the loyalty of others. She was the first person to tell me that rage, shame, and relief could all share the same room without any of them being wrong. I journaled obsessively. There were days my hands cramped from scribbling, entire notebooks filling with the tangle of my thoughts, memories of simpler times, lists of things I missed, petty insults I wanted to hurl, letters I'd never send. These pages became my evidence, not of their wrongdoing, but of my own survival. I charted the slow return of my appetite, The tentative laughter with colleagues at work, the new willingness to go to the gym, to shop without spiraling into a memory trap. Work was both a blessing and a curse. In some ways, it gave structure, something to iron the sheets of my day and force my mind outside the loop of anger and regret. My coworkers tiptoed around me at first, offering polite, sidelong glances and extra coffee breaks. Eventually, a few of them shared their own stories, bitter divorces, betrayals, the kind of secret pain you only reveal when you sense someone else understands. These confessions made me feel less alone. One Friday night, a group from the office dragged me to karaoke. I sang terribly, laughed until I nearly cried again, and realized that I could have fun, even without him, even without her. There were hard days, of course, days where my daughter's questions cut into my resolve, or when photos popped up in my phone's memories, smiling faces from a vacation that now felt like fiction. I got used to answering awkward questions politely. No, I wasn't still in touch with Heather. No, Mike and I couldn't reconcile. Yes, I was okay, even if it was only partly true. Some friends faded quietly into the background. Others, the ones who mattered, leaned in closer than ever before. Money became a new anxiety, but also a point of pride. I learned, for the first time in years, how to budget for two, how to negotiate car repairs, how to cook something halfway decent without burning it. Each tiny triumph felt monumental. The first time I assembled a bookshelf alone, the first time I filed taxes, even the first time I said no to an invitation and chose to simply rest. With every success, some piece of my old self seemed to return, dusted off and stronger than it was before. Slowly, a vision began to form, not of the life I'd lost, but of the life I could have. One where I chose my own paint colors, my own weekend routines, my own playlist in the car. I joined a book club at a local coffee shop, meeting people whose names had never passed through either Mike or Heather's lips. I reconnected with my sister, inviting her up for long walks and movie nights that lasted until dawn. Sometimes I imagined what I'd say to Mike or Heather if we ever spoke again. Not a speech fueled by rage, but something quiet, final, true. I survived you. I forgive myself. I hope you figure out what you need. Maybe one day I'll actually say it. There is no neat point at which healing is done. But seasons changed. Halloween came and went. Thanksgiving leftovers spoiled in my tiny fridge. And my daughter made me a construction paper star for the top of our very first just the two of us Christmas tree. By New Year's, I'd begun to feel a quiet kind of peace. The sense that my survival wasn't a fluke. That maybe, just maybe, I could build something better in the ruins. I didn't become fearless overnight. Some mornings, the ache of what happened still hummed beneath everything. An old bruise that flared in bad weather. But I promised myself and my daughter that we would keep moving forward. I would not allow their betrayal to become the axis upon which my life spun. Instead, I'd let it be the crack that let the light in. I'd let it teach me gentleness for myself, and maybe even, someday, a willingness to risk my heart again. I used to think happy endings were a kind of reward for goodness or loyalty. Now I know they're really just points along the road where you let hope back in. I started sewing again, clumsy at first, but steadier each week. I planted herbs on the windowsill. I made silly voices during story time. I danced barefoot in the living room with my daughter, laughing at the clumsy love we shared just by showing up for each other. I learned that sometimes strength looks like letting yourself be soft. Sometimes grace means crying in the shower, then stepping out and making oatmeal for breakfast. On the anniversary of the party, I lit a candle and wrote myself a letter, forgiving the woman I was that night for not knowing what she knows now. I listed all the tiny victories, the days I refused bitterness, the ways I'd held my daughter close, the moments I'd reached for joy, even when it felt impossible. When you're rebuilding from nothing, every brick matters. Now, when people ask how I did it, how I made it through, I don't offer easy answers. I tell them the truth. You get up, you grieve, you love your child, you ask for help, you keep living. You learn to take pride, not in being unbroken, but in becoming someone new, with room for scars, for beauty, for laughter again. Would I have chosen this road? Never. But as I look around at my little apartment, herbs thriving, art on the walls, the smell of something freshly baked, I'm almost grateful for it. My heart is still a patchwork, but it's mine, stitched with threads of hope, toughness, and unexpected joy. This is who I am now. And, for the first time in a long time, that is enough.